Good afternoon, Year 12. I hope everything's going okay, and I hope my video on Monday was useful to you. Today I'm going to be going off the PowerPoint presentation that we have been using mostly in these videos and for your study, because I don't think it does this part of the course enough justice, and I don't think it goes in detail enough from when I did it last time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this PowerPoint on the VLE in time for this video to be up, so you'll be able to access this while I'm talking through it. But yes, it will be called the Supreme Court Process of Nomination. You should be able to find it. It should be easy, and it will help you go through with me on this while I'm talking through it. So today, as you can see, we're going to be talking about the process of nomination and how somebody can go from being a judge somewhere else in the American justice system to being a Supreme Court judge, and what the process is for that happening. If you're paying attention to the news in the last couple of years, Brett Kavanaugh has went through this process and saw quite a lot of controversy surrounding this process at the time. And if you were following that, and if you were paying attention to that, some of this may be familiar and some of this may make sense to you and show why Brett Kavanaugh was having such an issue. We are going to be talking a little bit about him during this lesson anyway. So that should be a good background, and if you want to look that up and look up the Brett Kavanaugh situation, it would be very useful as a case study for you to use. I will talk about case studies later on anyway. So, this is the process of nomination and confirmation. First of all, recruitment. The president asks his advisors, including White House aides, Senate Judiciary Committee, and potentially the American Bar Association. 8 of the 9 current judges. That's not true, actually. I've changed that. So that changed with Kavanaugh. So 7 out of 9 of the current judges from the federal all come from the Federal Court of Appeals. Once that happens, the FBI checks are carried out on possible nominees. The president then decides on the final nominee, and the press are informed. Then the ABA provide a rating regarding their qualified status. That's the American Bar Association. And then they are confirmed. On Capitol Hill, the nominee appears before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Hearings are held, including witnesses, critics, and supporters of the nominee. And then the committee votes on the recommendation. The Senate only votes on the appointment after that. And the Senate have only rejected a nominee 12 times since 1789. So that's really, really rare. Anyway, that, to start with, is the general overview, but I'm going to go through that in a lot more detail now. So don't worry about writing that down for now, because I'm going to go through it in much more detail. So to start with, there has to be a vacancy. The president has to wait for this vacancy to occur, and over time there has been 119 vacancies since 1789, about 1 every 2 years. Therefore, a president doesn't have an automatic right to appoint someone to the Supreme Court. President Jimmy Carter didn't get 1 in his 4 years at all. The Supreme Court stayed the same that whole time. As you can see here, there's a little table that shows some of the Supreme Court nominations and the presidents that made them. And you can see Ronald Reagan managed to get 3 nominations in between 1981 and 1989. But George W. Bush, 2001 to 2009, same amount of time, only got 2. As you can see here, Barack Obama did get 3 nominations. That's because when Scalia died in 2016, it was during the time when Obama was on his way out and Trump was on his way in. And in the end, Neil Gorsuch, who was Trump's candidate, was the eventual justice. And Obama's nomination was rejected in the end because they didn't feel that Obama should get it. They felt that Trump should get the nomination instead. And as you can see, Trump since 2017 has had 2 already, which is quite a lot for a president that's only been going for three or 4 years at this point. So because Judges are made justices in the Supreme Court for life. This makes the president's decision much more important, as the justice will outlive their presidency, usually, and sometimes they will outlive the president physically as well, as in the president will die before the justice leaves the Supreme Court. So the process of nomination is incredibly important for a president because it's their legacy that they're leaving behind to the country, as well as their political standpoint that they want to put into the Supreme Court. Therefore, the Supreme Court is sometimes seen as an echo chamber through which the voices and views of earlier decades can still be heard to speak. So even though the presidents may have left their presidency and the kind of political landscape has changed, the Supreme Court is much more of a echo chamber of what used to happen. And this can be seen most recently with Anthony Kennedy, who was Reagan's appointment, and he was judge until 2018, almost 30 years after Reagan had left office in 1989. So you can see that their legacy lasts a lot longer in the Supreme Court than the legacy of their presidency. So let's do the kind of steps to get to the nomination. First of all, you need to have pools. So let's go to the pool. Once the the vacancy occurs, the president then commissions a search for suitable candidates. They seek to advice from different sources to try and make the best decision. So first they ask their political advisors, so senior White House aides and top officials in the Justice Department, for their possible nominees. They may also hear names mentioned by key members of Congress in their own party and from the Senate Judiciary Committee, who have a more formal role to play, which we'll talk about later on in this process. Then they may seek advice from the professional groups, such as the American Bar Association, although that is only usually done by Democratic presidents. Republican presidents tend to ignore what the ABA say and go with much more of a ideology-led Supreme Court justice, whereas the Democrats often seek advice from the ABA and work out which one would be the best for that. And then third of all, the president may turn to personal friends and confidants, especially if the president's had a lot of time going up through the political system, as they may have had access to much more Supreme Court justices on the way up, and they may be able to talk to more people that they believe have a better idea on who Supreme Court justices should be. Once the president works out their nomination, they may also look for another pool in the Federal Court of Appeals. So if they've worked out a couple of people from their confidants and the people that they talk to, they may also go to the Federal Court of Appeals for potential people to go into the Supreme Court. So if you can't remember, the Federal Court of Appeals are the one tier below the Supreme Court, and they've heard cases that may have made it to the Supreme Court in the past. Okay, so they are like the last line of defence before it gets to the Supreme Court. So they will have heard cases that the Supreme Court hasn't heard of. Of the current membership of the Supreme Court, all but two of the justices were taken from the Federal Court of Appeals. Eleanor Kagan and Brett Kavanaugh are the exceptions. So as you can see from this little table here, Brett Kavanaugh was a state court judge, where 18 of the past nominees for the Supreme Court have come from, and Eleanor Kagan was a Solicitor General, and 3 of the nominees from the past have come from that post. As you can see here, 34 people have been a federal judge before they made it into the Supreme Court, including Neil Gorsuch under Donald Trump. So that is the most popular way of working out your candidates. There are alternative pools as well. Excuse me. They may also look to state courts. When President Reagan had his first opportunity, he nominated Sandra Day O'Connor, who was a judge in the Arizona State Court of Appeals. And David Souter, nominated by President Bush in 1990, had been on the Federal Court of Appeals for only 3 months, and he was a state Court of Appeals judge as well. Another possible pool of recruitment is the Department of Justice. In 2010, when Obama nominated Eleanor Kagan, she was serving as a Solicitor General in the Department of Justice, as I may have mentioned when we looked at that table. So as you can see, it's not always the same way. It's not always the exactly the same nomination process. Sometimes presidents have a different idea and go for someone different because they fit better ideologically with the president, or they believe that they will do a better job in the Supreme Court, and that means that the president has much more of a say on the direction that the Supreme Court takes with these nominations. Once the shortlist has been drawn up, the FBI background checks are conducted on all the possible nominees, and the president personally interviews 2 or 3 finalists, and they decide on the nominee. Once the nominee is decided, the formal announcement is made. It's a major political event. The candidate, the members of his or her family, members of Congress, and the executive branch, as well as members of the press, all turn up. They have this massive, it's American. They have this massive kind of party atmosphere, and they announce their nomination, and all is good in the world. Then there is the unofficial but traditional kind of thing, I can't think of the word, which is where the ABA come in and they make a rating based on the nomination. And this does not mean anything, although if they were rated as not qualified, it probably would cause a massive issue when it goes to the Senate, but it doesn't actually stop the process. So the ABA give the nominees 1 of 3 ratings: well qualified, qualified, or not qualified. As it's a nomination to the USA's highest court, the well-qualified is expected, but of recent justices, Clarence Thomas and Brett Kavanaugh have both been given qualified, not well-qualified. The rest of the Supreme Court are all well-qualified. This, as I said, it doesn't have any bearing on whether they are nominated or not, but it may have an impact in the Senate, and we're going to talk about what the Senate does in a moment. So this is the confirmation process. Once announced, the single nominee has to be seen by the Senate Judiciary Committee. The hearings are held at which the witnesses include not only the nominee but also supporters and critics. And if in the case of Brett Kavanaugh, there were people who were accusing him of sexual abuse at these hearings as well. Witnesses might be individuals with close knowledge of the nominee or representatives of interest groups who support or oppose the nomination. And if the process goes badly for the nominee, they may be tempted to withdraw, or the president may call a halt to save themselves being embarrassed on the Senate floor. Again, the Senate Judiciary Committee cannot stop the nomination, but they have a big impact on what happens in the Senate, and they're like a litmus test for what happens in the Senate as well. Once the hearing is concluded, the committee votes on whether to or not to recommend further action. And while this is a formality, it shows the general position of the Senate, as I said. So, for Clarence Thomas, the Senate committee voted 7-7 on the nomination of Clarence Thomas, which was clear that he was going to be in for a fight in the Senate. He did eventually win the Senate with a margin of 4 votes. You only need a simple majority to win the Senate, so you just need to get over 50%, and he won by a margin of 4 votes. So as you can see, it was a really, really controversial appointment to the Supreme Court at the time. On the other hand, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was unanimously approved by the committee, and then she won 96-3 in the Senate. So as you can see, it's kind of a litmus test. It kind of tells you where it's going to go in the Senate, and if you lose the Senate Judiciary Committee, the president may lose confidence in you, and you may be removed from the race anyway. Here's a nice table that kind of outlines that. So Robert Bork, who was refused entry to the Supreme Court, was seen as well qualified by the ABA, but the Senate Judiciary Committee vote was 5-9, not recommending further action and saying that he should be removed from the race, but they took it to the Senate anyway, which he lost 42-58. So he didn't manage to get the majority, and he wasn't made a Supreme Court justice. As you can see at the bottom, the other interesting one I think at the moment is Brett Kavanaugh. 2018 was the year. His ABA rating was qualified. The Senate Judiciary Committee voted him 11-10, which was on a party lines. There was 11 Republican and 10 Democratic people in the Judiciary Committee there. So 11-10, and then he won the Senate 50-48, which correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the closest percentage that any Supreme Court justice has won the Senate on. So, as you can see, it's very, very it's a difficult process, and there is a lot of tests to get through to get to the point where you are the Supreme Court justice. So, after we've gone through all of those things, and hopefully you've made notes on them and you know it inside out, I would like you to think about these questions, because we're going to be looking at this on Friday. So on my Friday video will be about issues with the confirmation and nomination and the appointment process itself. So I would like you to think about what's wrong with this system. Okay, what issues does this process throw up? What outside ideological issues can have an impact on this, and therefore how do you think this process could be improved? You have the 3 essays that I would like you to complete. They are the homework. By Friday this week, so by the time my last video comes out, I will expect everyone to have done a 9 marker and sent it me. I have had a couple, so thank you to those people. And next week will be the extract 25 marker, but if you want to get ahead, please feel free. But the next 3 weeks, those are that's what I'm expecting you to do. So, thank you very much again, Year 12, for watching this video. I hope it's been useful. If you've got any questions, please email me. Please, I'm always open for people to ask me questions on email. And if you have any issues with the work, then please let me know. And overall, Year 12, stay safe. Thank you.